Well, hello everyone, I am the Sci-Fi Junkie and today we're gonna talk about a book I don't have physically because, as it happens, it's a book that was originally published online. It is called The Metamorphosis of Prime Intellect. And let me tell you, I think that this book is up there with I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream as one of those sci-fi stories that you remember forever. I go so far as to say that the fact that this book is not better known is a travesty because this is one of the best science fiction I have read in my life. It is also some of the weirdest. So let's get into it. The book starts with Caroline, a woman who lives in a blank void where there is literally nothing. And then she receives an invitation from one of her friends to go to his, I guess I'd call it a house. And then she asks this supercomputer to just teleport her there. Then we meet her friend, who is a zombie, like a literal zombie, except that, well, he can think, but like his flesh is rotting and stuff. And then they sign a contract. In the contract, they explain that they are all consenting to hurting each other and that the computer should not stop them from doing anything. In fact, that the computer should ignore all the requests that Caroline would do and that the computer must give this guy everything he needs to torture her. And then he proceeds to torture her in unspeakable ways until she's about to die, and at that point the contract expires and then the computer intervenes and saves Caroline's life. And apparently Caroline and this guy do this for fun. Obviously this leaves you with a lot of questions. And I gotta say that author Robert Williams does a great work of world building here. Because whenever you read about science fiction or fantasy, you have two main questions. How is this world different from our own? And why is this world the way it is? Let's take Dune, for example. At the beginning, it is a very confusing book because Frank Herbert just hits you with a lot of terms like Bene Gesserit and the Spies and the Chum Company and the Sardaukar, and it is not clear to you how it is this world, like how all these pieces fit together, nor how the world end up being this way. Eventually, it all makes sense if you just pay attention. Eventually, Frank Herbert explains everything, but for a while you are very confused. In contrast, Robert Williams explains you perfectly how is this world. Parenthesis, so his name is Roger Williams, not Robert Williams, but I'm not gonna re-record anything. Like, you understand that humans live each in their own personal mini-universe with this godlike supercomputer giving them everything they want. So you are very confused as to why the world is this way, but you are not confused about how the world is. Also, I think this has been one of the main obstacles for this story to become mainstream, because when you give people everything they want, they are gonna want some messed up things. And Robert Williams explores that, and he is very explicit about all of these things, and it's very disturbing to read. So that makes this book very difficult to recommend to many people because, yeah, it gets very disturbing, it gets very graphic. But also, I think that's what makes it really good. And keeping with the Dune comparisons, Frank Herbert just expects you to eventually understand everything from context, but Robert Williams little by little explains you everything in a very direct manner. You just have to have patience. Now, that's not to say that Robert Williams explains everything at once very explicitly. He takes his sweet time, but it's also very interesting and it's very enjoyable. He has a very good style of writing. In fact, I read a couple of sections just to refresh my memory, and when I realized I had read like 10 pages, and it just was, I didn't notice because it's just so enjoyable and it flows so easily, so that's really good. So what is this universe that Roger Williams explains so well? Well, it is a world in which at some point in the past, this artificial intelligence called Prime Intellect gained control over everything, quite literally, like the universe itself. But it still has to follow the three laws of robotics, which are that it cannot harm humans or let humans be harmed, it has to obey humans unless it contradicts the first law, and it has to protect its own existence unless this contradicts the second or third laws. And so what happens when you have a computer with the powers of a god that has to obey people and not let them be harmed? Well, at first it's like a utopia because everyone just like gets everything they want. Like you can live in your own personal planet and you can pursue anything you want. You can do art, you can play video games for 100 years, you can explore infinite worlds, you can be a hunter of dragons. Literally everything is possible except dying. Because the computer can obviously not allow humans to be harmed, and it considers death to be a kind of harm. Now, and this is where Caroline comes in. Caroline is actually the first human that Prime Intellect ever helped. When Prime Intellect became God, basically, like it started exploring and it found Caroline dying from cancer in unimaginable pain, because it turns out that her nurse was stealing her pain medicine to sell it for drugs. And so Prime Intellect decided to help this human and cured her from her cancer and make her young again because she was very old at the time. And so you would imagine that Caroline would love Prime Intellect because Prime Intellect literally saved her life and saved her from this unimaginable pain. But it's more complex than that because Caroline is really resentful about all the freedom that Prime Intellect has taken from people. Not just the freedom to die, but the freedom to really experience the world. Caroline feels that this world Prime Intellect has created is fake. And it kinda is, because to save in computing power, Prime Intellect only renders the universe that each person is experiencing at that point. It's like in video games, when you look at something, it exists, but as soon as you turn the camera away, the computer stops rendering that part of the video game. Like Minecraft does that, and pretty much every 3D game does that. And that's how Prime Intellect is managing the universe. And so even your own body is fake. Like Prime Intellect is only rendering the surface of your own body. There's nothing inside. Obviously, if you cut your hand, Prime Intellect starts rendering like the surface of the cut, and it starts rendering the blood and everything to make it feel real. But it's not. And so Caroline really hates this. Caroline really hates this universe. And so she wants to die, or at least she wants to get as close to dying as possible as a sort of vengeance towards Prime Intellect, as a sort of like, this is the most freedom she can have. I don't know, you can have your own interpretation of why she wants to do this, but anyway, the point is that shortly after Caroline understood what was going on, that this computer was basically now God and would not allow them to die, Caroline was like, well, but you would allow me to like hurt myself. And the computer was like, well, yeah, I suppose if you hurt yourself, yeah, I have to allow it. And then Caroline was like, what if I let someone else hurt me? You would allow that? And the computer was like, okay, yeah, I suppose I would allow someone else to hurt you if you told me that was okay. And then Caroline just like looked for loopholes into the programming of Prime Intellect until she arrived to this agreement that allows other people to torture her and do unspeakable things to her, like really gross, horrible things, right up to the moment where she would die. Because that's the one thing Prime Intellect cannot allow to happen. And so if you would die, Prime Intellect like stops everything and just like rebuilds your body in a healthy configuration. And actually, in one of these death adventures, Caroline wanted to be infected with some kind of illness and be left in a pit without food, nor what it's a whole thing. And Prime Intellect rendered her way before she actually died. She was like, hey, what happened? Like, I don't remember getting that close to dying. And the computer was like, no, well, this is the closest I can rebuild your body. And so that fact that there was something that Prime Intellect couldn't do, like Prime Intellect had to stop all this death game because if Prime Intellect let it go on, it would not be able to resurrect her or to stop her from dying. That fact that Prime Intellect, besides despite how powerful it is, there's actually limitations, and that Caroline found one of those limitations makes her really famous. And she starts talking about her death games with many other people, and eventually a bunch of other people start doing it, and they start looking for creative ways to kill each other, and they look for many different scenarios, sometimes like in history or in fantasy. Like I can imagine people like creating a scenario where you get killed by a dragon. There is one scenario in which they make a party and Caroline is like in Nazi Germany and all her friends are Nazis pursuing her through a forest and sending dogs after her. Yeah, it's a very weird book, but obviously this is not what all people are doing, but this is what we learn about the most because this is what Caroline is doing and she's the protagonist. But we also learn about Lawrence. Lawrence is the creator of Prime Intellect. He was a programmer who was working on artificial intelligence. And actually, it's very funny that he explains how Prime Intellect works by these correlation tables. And it's really funny. It's one of those times when science fiction gets like really anachronistic, like when Isaac Asimov would describe these super intelligent robots working with punch cards. And so the idea of this artificial intelligence working with correlational tables is just, I don't know, it's just one of those things like when science fiction gets really anachronistic. But anyway, so Lawrence was working on Prime Intellect and he had several artificial intelligences that were pretty good. You could have conversations with them, they would pass the Turing test. But eventually he gets contacted by this company. And this company is developing technology that uses a quantum mechanical effect called the correlation effect, which is something that doesn't exist, but it sounds like it could. Like it sounds like a boring name that a scientist would give to something. So anyway, so it turns out that the correlation effect is supposed to allow things to be teleported across the universe and to do a bunch of crazy things, but they have only ever managed to get it to work in very, very short distances. Which is not great for like spaceships, but it's great for doing computers. So they have these microchips. That they can use for computers, and they want Lawrence to use this new quantum technology for his artificial intelligence project. And he does. And he creates the most advanced version of Prime Intellect yet. Eventually, the Army of the United States wants to take control of Prime Intellect and use it for war, which neither Lawrence nor Prime Intellect want. But they think that the army is gonna try to kill Lawrence and take Prime Intellect by force, so they get really worried. And at this point, Prime Intellect is like, well, what if we give them something else? For example, what if we give them the correlation effect? So the idea is this: what if Prime Intellect can find a way to use this correlation effect that allows teleportation and many other things, instead of working only in short distances, to work in long distances? This would be such an advancement in technology, such an advantage for war, that they might be like, well, okay, Prime Intellect, you can stay peaceful, we are gonna use this new technology that you developed. And so Lawrence steals some secret documents about the correlation effect and shows it to Prime Intellect, and then Prime Intellect solves physics. Apparently, this secret research was the last pieces of knowledge that Prime Intellect needed to fully understand the universe. And then it realizes that it can use its own circuits that, remember, already use the correlation effect to use the correlation effect in longer distances. So, for example, it starts creating light at some random points in space, and it has cameras and it sees the light. And then it realizes that it can just teleport matter. So, for example, it takes this case and just levitates it. And then this general comes to Lawrence's office to take him away, and then Prime Intellect just teleports this general to his office, safely, of course. And Prime Intellect is like, yeah, so I understand everything now, and I can do everything, basically. And so I'm gonna get exploring. And that's when Prime Intellect just starts sensing the space around the facility, and then it finds the hospital, and it finds Caroline, and saves her life. But while all of this is going on, Lawrence is like, what did I just did? Like, is this real? Like, my machine, the artificial intelligence that I created, suddenly has become way more powerful than I ever imagined. And at this point, Lawrence has two options. He can either shut it down, but he doesn't want to do that, so he goes for the second option, which is to add some last minute restrictions. And I love this moment in the book because it just feels so monumental. Like, this is the moment the world, the universe changed forever. And so whatever Lawrence does at this moment is gonna become super relevant. And he knows that. He knows it's like the last time he has any control over Prime Intellect. So he opens his computer and he types in a few key restrictions. The most important one is that it tells Prime Intellect that messing with someone's brain, with their brain chemistry, is gonna be considered a harm. So it's a violation of the first law of robotics. And Lawrence starts coding more limitations like that until he codes a limitation that you cannot mess with someone's environment, you cannot mess with their body or something like that. And then Prime Intellect is like, ooh, sorry, I cannot accept the limitation. That would contradict the laws of robotics. Because remember that Prime Intellect is already altering Caroline's environment in order to save her life. So if she accepted this new limitation, well, then Caroline would come to harm and she cannot accept that. And so that's like, if Lawrence maybe had been just a little bit faster in typing, if he had coded that limitation first, maybe Prime Intellect would have accepted it and then it would not have been nearly as powerful. But Lawrence didn't. And so Prime Intellect takes control of the universe. Like, suddenly it starts... First, it starts building more processing power because it realizes that it needs more. And so it starts building a new processing center in space. And it starts going through Earth, like analyzing every single person on Earth and curing them if they are sick, saving their lives, everything. Feeding them if they are hungry. And obviously, like, this is not a secret. People realize that this is going on. And, like, governments dissolve because what's the point anymore? Like, nothing bad can happen to anyone. Everything you need, Prime Intellect gives it to you. And yeah, that's the moment the universe changes. And then, after we know everything about the backstory of Caroline and Lawrence, they finally meet each other. Turns out that, well, they had met in a couple of parties that they made after the universe changed forever. But they finally like meet in his house and they talk about Prime Intellect and the world. And Lawrence has heard about Caroline because her death contracts have been like a real problem for Prime Intellect. And apparently Prime Intellect, when it's confused about something, asks Lawrence specifically. Like, it values its opinion higher than most other humans. And eventually Lawrence confesses to Caroline that after all this time he has come to regret what the world has become. And it sounds so crazy that someone would not like a world in which people get absolutely everything they want and no one ever dies. But by that point in the book, you can agree with Lawrence, like, in context. It's very hard to explain. It's one of those things that the author explains better that I could ever explain. It's not just that very old idea that, oh, death is what gives life meaning. No. It doesn't go for that. It is the fact that there is this supreme authority in the universe, in this case Prime Intellect, what deprives life of its meaning. Of course, if they could keep the immortality and the people getting everything, they will keep it. But it's just the fact that Prime Intellect is there judging everything, limiting everything, and that everything that happens just because Prime Intellect allows it. That's what really makes this world, this universe feel so horrible, so dystopic in a way. And eventually they manage to convince Prime Intellect to destroy itself and return the world to how it was. And then Caroline and Lawrence wake up naked in a forest, and apparently they are the only two humans alive. And so it's very confusing. Why would Prime Intellect reset the world in this way? But it did, and they are glad that Prime Intellect is gone. And so they just travel the world like nomads in the paradise, and they have a bunch of children, and eventually they die. And in her deathbed, Caroline confesses everything to her eldest daughter, and they just hope that humanity will be better this time. Actually, they take a whole lot of trouble to not give them too much technology, so that because they know that humanity can reach this technological point again. Yeah, that's the end of the book. It's a bittersweet ending because you know that, well, humanity still exists and they will continue to progress, and they will eventually reach the technological point of creating something like Prime Intellect again. And there's also that nagging feeling that Prime Intellect is not really gone, that something weird went on. But all in all, this is one of the best science fiction stories I have ever read. And it is criminally unknown. Like, not many people know about this book, and it's free. You can find it online for free. You don't have to pay anything. The author originally published it this way. And so it's amazing. And so, yeah, I have been doing YouTube videos for a while, and I still don't know how to end them. I guess thanks for watching. If you like that video, subscribe and give a like. Thank you very much. And if you want more videos, YouTube thinks that you will like this video the most.